What up, YouTube? What up, fans? Franchise Sports TV back again with another video. But this time, I'm doing something new. I'm starting a new series based on what I say, my opinion maybe some other people's opinions. The NBA's underrated players. These players can either be players who are not in the Hall of Fame, probably deserve some Hall of Fame, or players who are in the Hall of Fame but not talked about or discussed in NBA YouTube circles, could you say? Technically, I started this series in the summertime with Sharif Abdul-Rahim, but this video I will start with the recently inducted Hall of Famer Ben Wallace. See, what I've been seeing lately from the sports media, maybe YouTubers, is the disrespect towards the players of the past. And not for them, you already know the saying, if not for them, you wouldn't have an NBA. Now, Ben Wallace is probably one of the best defensive players in NBA history. But his career didn't start off like most NBA players. So once again, Ben Wallace. But before I begin, like, share, subscribe. Ben Wallace. Ben Carney Wallace was born September 10th, 1974, Whitehall, Alabama. He was the 10th of 11 children. He excelled in high school sports, most like all stars usually are. Particularly, he was good in baseball, football. He was a linebacker, and of course, basketball. Charles Oakley discovered Wallace in 1991 and recommended the 6'9" Wallace to Virginia University, Oakley's alma mater. But first, Wallace played college basketball at a junior college called Cuyahoga Community College. I hope I pronounced that right. Where he excelled in defense and rebounds. He averaged, 17.0 rebounds, 6.9 blocks per game, and earned him a spot on Virginia Union. On Virginia's basketball team, Ben Wallace averaging 13.4 points per game, 10 rebounds, and led the team to a Division II Final Four and had multiple Division II All-American teams listed to his name. He tried for the NBA draft but went undrafted, went to Italy for a year. I think he only played one game for that team, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce. He was picked up by the Washington Bullets, a.k.a. the Wizards, in 1996, coming in the same year as fellow Hall of Famers Kobe Bryant, Ray Allen, AI, and many others. His first year on the Bullets, he didn't play much, but the Bullets made it to the playoffs but were swept off the court by the eventual champions, the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls was a 69-13 team and probably one of the better Bulls teams, and they only lost 4 games in the playoffs and the finals combined. The next year, the Bullets gave Wallace more of a role, starting for 16 games, but the Bullets, he was able to establish himself as a great defender. But after those 3 years on the Bullets, he was traded to the Orlando Magic. But once he got to the Orlando Magic, he became a starter, averaging 4.8 points a game, 8.2 rebounds, and 1.6 blocks. But those Orlando Magic teams never made it to the playoffs. Just never were good. And then he was traded to the Detroit Pistons. And now we're really cooking now. But he was traded to the Detroit Pistons for free agent superstar forward Grant Hill in the sign and trade. I remember actually when this trade went down. Most thought this trade was lopsided, was goofy. People thought the Orlando Magic got Grant Hill for nothing, but yeah, they was wrong because we all know what happened to Grant Hill once he got to Orlando. He didn't play as much. He was always hurt with those knees. I think it was the knee or the ankles. Sometimes I be getting him and Penny Hardaway confused. I think it was the ankles for Grant Hill. But Wallace continued to get better. After his year on the Pistons, Wallace led the league in rebounding at 13 points a game. I was about to say points per game. Per rebounds a game, and led in blocks at 3.5. He led the league in that. In the 01-02 season, he became Defensive Player of the Year for the first time, also named to the Defensive First Team and All NBA Third Team. But the Pistons, they made it to the playoffs, right? But it was kicked out by the Celtics. I think they was gentlemen sweep than Celtics, but I think they were. But the Pistons were led by Jerry Stackhouse, so that didn't work at all. So GM and Pistons legend, as he should be top 75 all time, but Joe Dumars got on the phone, made a trade for Richard Hamilton, signed Chauncey Billups in that offseason. In addition, in the 2002 draft, drafted Tayshaun Prince in the first round. I think it was at 27. The Pistons improved in the next year, beating out Orlando in the first round. They beat the 76ers in the semifinals, but were swept by the eventual Eastern Conference champions, the New Jersey Nets. Now, the funny thing about Ben Wallace, he was named to another Defensive Player of the Year, of course. Another Defensive All-Team, All-NBA, of course. But he also finished in MVP voting. And this is with Rick Hamilton leading the team in scoring at 19. And also, Ben Wallace became an All-Star for the first time. That's amazing. But we forget about that sometimes. But moving on before I make my final point. But there was one more problem with the Pistons. They needed another piece to the puzzle. In the offseason, the Pistons grabbed Darvin Ham, Lindsey Hunter. I think both of those came from the Bucks. And older Eldon Campbell. They also drafted Darko Milicic when Joe Dumars should have drafted Carmelo Anthony. Imagine Carmelo on that team. But that was not the biggest part. The big trade in the middle of the season, they got the rowdy. I wouldn't say down on his luck, but you know he's rowdy. All no lie, Rasheed Wallace. They actually got rid of half the team for him. But Ben Wallace didn't win Defensive Player of the Year. He actually had to share some of those defensive, not abilities, but assignments with Rasheed Wallace. But he was also named to Ben Wallace, all-defensive team. But the rewards were greater in this season. The Pistons finished 54-28, second in the Central Division, behind the Indiana Pacers, third in the East. The first round appearance was my own team, the Milwaukee Bucks, beating them 4-1. Conference semifinals, they got their revenge on the Nets, beat them 4-3. And then the conference finals, they beat the Indiana Pacers 4-2. A very good Indiana Pacers team with Ron Artest and Jermaine O'Neal. Now that I think about it, to go off sidetrack, the Pistons' way to the finals this year was sounding like the Bucks' way to the finals. Well, they swept Miami, but went 4-3 with the Nets in the semifinals, but went 4-2 with the Indiana Pacers. I mean, not Indiana Pacers, Atlanta Hawks. Almost similar. Almost. But anyways, but the Pistons were back in the NBA Finals since 1990. But their opponent, Kobe and Shaq and the Los Angeles Lakers. Most people thought the Lakers would win the series handily because you got to think this Laker team was with not just Kobe and Shaq, but also Karl Malone and Gary Payton. But also an older Karl Malone and Gary Payton. But nonetheless, Game 1, the Pistons took 87-75. Got foul in Shaq trouble. Got Shaq in foul trouble, but the Pistons let Kobe and Shaq score whatever, but they did shut down the rest of the team, holding them to 16 points. Game 2, the Lakers took the dub in overtime after Kobe tied the game at 89-89. Kobe actually had a tough series with Tayshaun Prince and Richard Hamilton guarding them. It wasn't easy for the young Kobe. We're going to get that straight. Game 3, the Pistons single-handedly took down the Lakers by 20 at a score of 88-68. Keep in mind, these are low-scoring games back then when defense was tolerated. Not the high-scoring three-point contest we got now, but the combination of both Wallaces made it hard for Shaq. And Ben Wallace held it down against Shaq without a problem. But also, there's one more thing I wanted to point out. Those 68 points was the fewest scored in the finals game. amazing. More on that later. Game 4, the Pistons won again, single-handedly. In Game 5, the Pistons went off to win the series. But also, like I said, this team had 4 Hall of Famers, the Lakers team. But in that game, the clinching game, Ben Wallace had 18 points, 22 rebounds, and for the whole entire series, he averaged 10 points and 14 rebounds in the finals. Now, going back to the 68 points scored by the Lakers, this version of the Detroit Pistons team, I say this version because you can't forget about Isaiah's team. Many considered this, if they remember clearly, is regarded to being one of the best defensive teams in NBA history due to the defensive prowess of a Ben Wallace. They broke many records on defense. They allowed 80.6 points a game, had a defensive rating of 92.0 in the playoffs. Only one or two teams that only allowed under 60-point playoff games. Finals include the other being the 1998 Chicago Bulls. They allowed under 90 points in 18 playoff games. They never let anyone get over 100. The list goes on and on and on and on. There's a lot of lists. But they was a very good defensive team. It was hard to score. It was hard for any opponent like a Kobe to do anything that he usually do against lesser opponents. Now, I do think this Detroit Pistons team will give any of those Golden State teams with KD a run for the money, because you could not score on them. Like I said, Rip Hamilton wasn't making it easy for Kobe or Nate Tayshaun Prince. Shaq had a hard time with the undersized and height Ben Wallace, which is amazing. But this is the thing about Ben Wallace. Yeah, he was undersized at 6'9", but he was built like a football player. He was sturdy. He knew how to keep his base working when it came to the post, playing in the post. He knew what he was doing down there. Following their championship season, Ben Wallace was named to another Defensive Player of the Year award, again, his third, but he had a problem. He was the ignition for the Malice in the Palace, which pushed Ron Artest. Well, he pushed Ron Artest, and you know the rest. Ben Wallace, for his role in that Rumble, served 6 games, but it didn't stop him from earning his award and many more awards. The Pistons ran through the East again, including the 76ers, the Pacers, and the Heat, with Shaq to reach the finals again. The 05 NBA Finals was a defensive fight between the Spurs and Pistons. Two very good defensive teams of the 2000s. And fans had a problem with that because many people were fond of the Pistons due to the lack of big names, superstardom, and you can say the same for the Spurs. Not many people saw Tim Duncan and the Spurs as entertainers. Reason sometimes people like to disrespect Tim Duncan if he didn't watch him play in his prime. This was his prime. And plus, these teams played the right way. Same for the Pistons. The Pistons took the Spurs 7 games but lost in Game 7. 4 games to 3. Spurs are champions. During this series, Wallace actually had a down. Well, he probably played more games in this series. He played 7 compared to the 5 the previous year, but he averaged 10 points and 11 rebounds. In his last year with the Pistons, he won another Defensive Player of the Year award. An all-star bid, but beat LeBron James and the Cavs. The Bucks, of course, but couldn't get past the Miami Heat with Dwayne Wade. And that was pretty much it of his tenure with the Detroit Pistons in his prime. That was probably the last time he won a Defensive Player of the Year. Wallace signs a 4-year contract with the division rival Chicago Bulls, but it didn't work out as he planned. He had knee injuries his whole time there. He was traded to another Central Division team, the Cavs, to play with LeBron. But coming off those knee injuries, Ben Wallace was moved to power forward because they had Ilgauskas at center, and he vastly improved that Cavs defense. He made it hard for Kevin Garnett in the Boston Celtics 2008 playoffs. With Wallace on the team, the Cavs had a defensive rate of 102.1 and allowed 87 points per game from opponents. But his tenure in the Cavs didn't last long. In 2009, he was traded to Phoenix Suns for Shaq. What a circle of life. But he never played a minute for the Suns. He was bought out by the Suns. He returned to the Pistons in the 2010 season at age 36. But his second time with the Pistons, he surpassed the 10,000 rebound mark, becoming the 34th player in NBA history to accomplish that feat. In 2012, Wallace played 1,055 games, surpassing the record held by Avery Johnson for the most games played by an undrafted player. After the 2012 season, he pretty much retired and is now the basketball operations, and team engagement advisor for the Detroit Pistons. Ben Wallace. Well, Ben Wallace left. For his whole career, he averaged 5.7 points per game, 9.6 rebounds, and 2 blocks per game. He's an NBA champion, 4-time All-Star, 3-time All-NBA second team, never got a first team, 2-time All-NBA third team, 4-time Defensive Player of the Year winner, 5-time All-Defensive first team, All-Defensive second team, led in rebounds twice, a blocks leader in 2002. His number 3 is retired by the Detroit Pistons, first team division All-American, ABC, and of course, a Hall of Famer inducted in 2021. And he is always known for his fro for a couple of games, and then he have his head braided, I think, and he also wore a headband. So there was a problem when he went to Chicago wearing that headband. I guess Scott Styles didn't want him wearing the headband, but he was the exception, so they let him wear the headband. That's one thing you can remember about Ben Wallace. It's always his hair. Like, it'd be like 4 games, 3 games, he had his hair all wild, blown out, and then he had the braids. He was always on Black Air Force Energy time. That's the way he played. He's the only player in NBA history to record 1,000 rebounds, 100 blocks, and 100 steals in 4 consecutive seasons. Only undrafted player playing in history to be voted as a starter for the All-Star team. 1 or 2 players who won the Defensive Player of the Year 4 times, the other being Dikembe Mutombo, led in blocks in all time for the Pistons. Only 3 players have had 15 rebounds, 3 blocks over a season. The other was Kareem and Bob McAdoo. And one of 5 players in NBA history to lead the NBA in rebound and blocking averages in the same season, the other being Kareem, Bill Walton, Hakeem, and probably most likely, hopefully, future Hall of Famer Dwight Howard. Maybe Wallace should have been top 75, but you know how that goes. But his resume goes on and on. And to think that Draymond Green is on a level of Ben Wallace or even a Dennis Rodman is crazy. That's because the younger generation don't know basketball. Ben Wallace was very impactful, probably more than what Draymond is for the Golden State Warriors. He impacted every team he was on. If you look at the Cavs, like I said, he improved their defense. He was part of one of the best defensive teams in history of the NBA. So I don't want to hear none of this Draymond Green Hall of Famer talk, because he could not hold Ben Wallace's stock strap if he tried. But we seriously got to stop disrespecting the greats from the 50s, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, especially the 90s and the 2000s, for the sake of a player who's half of those players from the past. Half of what Ben Wallace was. But Ben Wallace will go down as one of the best defenders to play the game, and he let his game speak for himself. Word to the wise to the younger generation.